My family texted, "Don't contact us again." I stood in the parking lot stunned. I'd paid off their debts, bought my brother a house, funded my sister's dreams. I called back, blocked. That night, my uncle handed me a folder. Inside, forged signatures, stolen inheritance, and a recording of my mother saying, "Ethan needs to be cut off if we want to keep everything. I'm Nathan, 35. The man they erased after I stopped paying. I had just stepped out of a budget review meeting at the Fairmont retail headquarters in Raleigh when my phone buzzed. I glanced down, expecting a calendar alert or maybe a reminder to pick up dry cleaning. Instead, it was a text from my mother. It read, "Family needs space. Don't contact us anymore." I stared at the screen, frozen. My first instinct was to laugh, thinking it was one of those weird, autocorrect errors she's infamous for. But the three dots that usually follow her messages didn't appear. No correction, no joke, just silence. I stood in the middle of the parking garage, the heat of the concrete radiating through my shoes, feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted. I called her, straight to voicemail. Tried again. Same thing. I opened my contacts, scrolled to my sister Kayla. Called. Nothing. Then Logan, my younger brother. Same. Even Tyler, the youngest, blocked. All of them. I walked toward my car, fumbling with my keys, trying to breathe. The same hands that had written checks to cover Kayla's marketing classes co-signed Logan's auto loan and Venmo'd Tyler for everything from rent to groceries were now trembling. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and just sat there. I couldn't move, couldn't drive, couldn't think. I replayed the message again in my head. "Don't contact us anymore." What the hell did that mean? I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were just going through something. Maybe this was some dramatic attempt at tough love. But it didn't feel like that. This felt final. Over the past decade, I had wired more money to my family than I'd saved for myself. When I landed my first real job out of UNC, I was making $60K and still sending half of it home. When I made CFO at 32, my salary tripled, but so did their requests. Fix the roof, help with Logan's DUI lawyer, cover Kayla's website launch, Tyler's tuition deposit. Every month, it was something. And I gave. Not just out of obligation, but because I believed that's what family did. You show up, you sacrifice, you don't keep score, but apparently they did. I thought about Thanksgiving last year. I flew everyone to Asheville, rented out a cabin with a mountain view, catered everything. I remember Kayla scrolling on her phone during dinner, Logan arguing politics with Tyler in the living room, my mom complaining that the mashed potatoes weren't homemade. I chalked it up to stress, family quirks. But now it all felt calculated, or at least indifferent. I finally turned the engine over and began driving. I wasn't sure where I was going, but home didn't feel like the right place. I ended up at a quiet park near Walnut Creek, parked again, and just sat under the faded gold leaves rustling above. There were a few kids playing in the distance, their laughter rising and falling with the wind. I watched them, wondering when family became so complicated. I opened my phone and scrolled through old texts. I found one from Kayla a few months back, asking if I could send her an extra $500 for a last-minute branding consultant. She'd ended it with 3 hearts. Then Logan's long apology last winter after crashing my car while I was out of town, and Tyler's 3 a.m. message thanking me for covering his deposit after he lost his temp job. None of it made sense now. It felt like I'd stepped into a new chapter of a story I didn't know I was in. I tried calling again. Nothing. Just the automated voice telling me the number was unavailable. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from my assistant Clara, reminding me about a quarterly call with the New Jersey division. I silenced it. I wasn't ready to face spreadsheets, KPIs, or balance sheets. Not when my own life felt bankrupt in the only account that had ever really mattered to me. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and listened to the wind. Somewhere in the mess of betrayal and confusion, I could feel something shift. A door closing, maybe. Or maybe it was finally opening. I didn't know yet. But I knew I wouldn't be the same after today. I drove for nearly an hour without realizing where I was heading until I found myself near Franklin Street in Chapel Hill. The campus had changed since I left, but some things looked exactly the same. The bookstore on the corner, the little coffee shop where I pulled all-nighters, the bench near the quad where I used to sit between classes and wonder how I was going to get through it all. At 16, I was stocking shelves at a grocery store after school and bussing tables on weekends. My dad had already left by then, and Mom was juggling 2 jobs, barely keeping the lights on. It never felt like a choice. Rent was due, Kayla needed school supplies, Logan had outgrown his shoes again. So I worked. I handed over my paychecks sometimes without even opening them. Mom would say thank you sometimes, but mostly she'd just sigh, like the weight had been lifted for one more week. I told myself that was enough. By the time I graduated high school, I had saved just enough for a semester at UNC. The financial aid package covered part of it, but I had to pick up 2 jobs on campus to cover the rest. I worked the early morning shift at the student gym, then evenings at a local diner off campus. Sometimes I'd sleep in the back office between shifts just to squeeze in a nap. I didn't party, I didn't join clubs, I didn't have time. My family needed me. I remember one winter when Logan got sick and the hospital bills piled up. Mom called me crying. I was in the middle of finals, behind on rent, and down to my last $50. I wired her everything I had, then skipped meals for 3 days. I told myself this was what big brothers were supposed to do. After graduation, I landed a junior analyst job at Fairmont Retail's corporate office. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough. I moved into a tiny apartment in Durham and sent home $200 a month. When I got promoted to senior analyst, I upped it to $500. When I became manager, I co-signed on Logan's student loans. When I made director, I paid off the remaining balance on Mom's mortgage. No one asked me to, but no one stopped me either. I remember one conversation with Kayla maybe 2 years ago. She called me crying because her car had broken down on the way to a photo shoot in Wilmington. I overnighted her $1,200 and even called a mechanic to meet her on the side of the road. She posted a picture the next day, all smiles, thanking a special someone who always believes in me. That someone, of course, remained unnamed. When I finally became CFO at 32, it felt like I had made it. My salary was more than I ever thought I'd see in my lifetime. I bought a townhouse in Cary, traded in my 10-year-old Corolla for something that didn't rattle over potholes, and treated myself to a leather couch I didn't have to assemble. I was proud. I thought my family would be too. Instead, the calls started coming more frequently. Kayla wanted to launch her own brand and needed startup funds. Logan wanted to refinance his house but didn't qualify a loan. Tyler got laid off and needed help with rent. Mom needed her roof replaced, then her AC unit, then new tires, then a new water heater. Each time it was urgent, each time it was framed as temporary. But the payments never stopped. I didn't question it. I told myself this was what success was for. Not just for me, but for them. If I had the means, how could I not share it? But something shifted over the past year. At first it was small. Missed thank yous. Kayla posting pictures in Miami while I covered her student loans. Logan bragging about a new grill while I made his car payment. Mom declining dinner invitations but still requesting help with bills. I started to notice how rarely anyone asked how I was doing. One night I called Kayla just to talk. No requests, no agenda. Just wanted to hear her voice. She sounded distracted. Said she'd call me back. She didn't. I brought it up at the next family dinner. Mentioned how I sometimes felt like the ATM in the room. They laughed, called me dramatic, said I needed a vacation. Maybe they were joking. Maybe they weren't. I started pulling back a little. Skipped a couple of transfers, waited to see if anyone would notice. They did, but not in the way I hoped. Kayla sent me a passive-aggressive text about how some people say they support you, but only when it's convenient. Logan sent a Venmo request labeled gas to visit Mom, LOL. Tyler stopped responding altogether. Still, I kept showing up. Birthdays, holidays, emergencies, I was always there until now. I sat on that same bench near the quad and stared up at the ski, wondering how many other kids had sat there thinking about everything but themselves. How many older brothers, older sisters, single moms, working students had passed through this place carrying the weight of other people's lives. I felt sad and tired, mostly tired. My phone buzzed again. A calendar reminder for Kayla's podcast launch. She hadn't told me the time. I wasn't invited. Just a generic link to a crowdfunding campaign and a message that read, "Hope you'll support like always." I deleted it. I sat there a while longer watching students hustle past with backpacks and headphones and dreams that hadn't yet been reshaped by family obligation. I remembered being one of them. Hungry, driven, hopeful. And I wondered for the first time in years what I might have done with my life if I had been allowed to want something just for me. A breeze picked up, scattering the leaves across the sidewalk. I stood up, dusted off my coat, and walked back to my car. This time I knew exactly where I was going. I pulled into the driveway of Mom's house in West Raleigh just after 6. It was a warm Saturday evening in early April, one of those rare Carolina days that hinted at summer but still smelled like spring. I had stopped by a bakery on Hillsborough Street and picked up her favorite lemon tart, the one she used to buy for us when we couldn't afford birthday cakes. I thought it might make the dinner feel lighter. It didn't. Inside, the air felt stiff. Kayla was in the kitchen pouring wine with perfectly manicured nails and fake lashes too thick for a casual dinner. Logan was already halfway through a beer, leaning against the counter like he owned the place. Tyler was late as usual. I set the tart on the table and looked around. No one acknowledged it, or me. Dinner was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. The kind of meal that used to bring us together when we were kids. Back then, even if we fought, we laughed with our mouths full and passed plates like rituals. Tonight, everyone was quiet. Kayla was scrolling on her phone. Logan was texting. Mom was sipping her wine with that tight smile she wore when pretending everything was fine. I sat at the far end of the table. No one sat beside me. The empty chair to my left stayed that way all night. Halfway through dinner, Kayla cleared her throat and said she had an announcement. She had been accepted into a branding accelerator program in Atlanta. Something exclusive and trendy, promising to make her the next big lifestyle influencer. She needed startup funds, $10,000 to cover the program travel, content production, and initial campaign costs. She looked at me while saying it as if the decision had already been made. I took a breath and said I was proud of her truly, but I wasn't in a place to sponsor another project right now. I had just made a down payment on a new apartment, and work had shifted our annual bonuses due to Q4 underperformance. I offered to help her brainstorm alternative funding, maybe crowdfunding or a small business loan. She blinked at me like I had slapped her. Mom set her fork down slow and deliberate and looked at me across the table. "Do you ever think about anyone but yourself, Nathan?" The words hit harder than any slap. I stared at her, waiting for a flicker of regret in her eyes. There was none. Kayla folded her arms. Logan looked away. Even Tyler, who had just walked in, paused in the doorway like he'd walked into the wrong room. I didn't argue. I finished my meal in silence, the lemon tart untouched in the center of the table. After dinner, I offered to help clean up. Mom said no. Kayla didn't look up from her phone. Logan had already disappeared onto the porch. I left before dessert. In the weeks that followed, I noticed the shift. Group texts that once included me now didn't. Kayla posted pictures from Atlanta, tagging new business partners, captioning them with things like "building from the ground up" and "real support is everything." Logan stopped checking in. Mom returned my calls less often. Tyler's tone grew short, like every question was a nuisance. That summer, I drove down to Wilmington for Tyler's birthday. I brought him a gift card and a framed photo of the four of us as kids at Jordan Lake. He opened it, barely looked at it, and said thanks, with the same enthusiasm he'd give to a parking receipt. Later that night, I overheard him telling a friend that Nathan's just a paycheck, not a person. I stepped outside and sat on the curb for almost an hour, trying not to cry. It was the first time I realized that love in our family had become transactional. I used to think they didn't see me because I was too quiet, too busy, too focused. But now I wondered if they didn't see me because they had trained themselves not to. It was easier to ask for things when you believed the giver didn't need anything back. Easier to feel entitled when you thought someone existed only to provide. At Thanksgiving that year, I offered to host. I rented a cabin in Asheville, catered the entire weekend, bought everyone personalized gifts. No one said thank you. Kayla spent most of it filming vlogs. Logan brought a girl I had never met and didn't introduce. Tyler didn't show up until the second night and left before breakfast. Mom complained the whole time about the altitude giving her headaches. After they left, I sat alone in the cabin, surrounded by leftover food and untouched gifts, wondering how it would become this. I kept telling myself it would get better, that families go through rough patches, that I just had to keep showing up. But showing up didn't fix what was broken, especially when no one else bothered to. One night, about a month after Thanksgiving, I got a voicemail from Mom. She said she was worried about me, that I seemed distant lately. She didn't ask why. She didn't mention Kayla's loan or Logan's silence or Tyler's sarcasm. She just said, "You know we love you, but we need you to be part of this family. You can't shut us out." I remember sitting on the floor of my apartment, staring at that message, thinking about all the years I had spent trying to be part of this family, and how somehow I had become the outsider. I never stopped loving them, but I started loving them with caution. And once you love someone with caution, everything changes. The email came in on a Thursday afternoon while I was reviewing Q1 variance reports. The subject line read, "Exciting opportunity." It was from Kayla. I opened it expecting a newsletter, maybe another podcast episode drop. Instead, it was a long message about a rebranding campaign she had been planning for months. She wanted to hire a creative agency in Atlanta, relaunch her social media with high-end content, and position herself as a lifestyle authority for women of color navigating their 30s. She needed capital, $25,000. She called it an investment, promised returns in the form of exposure and legacy, said I'd be helping her create something that inspired others. She wrote that no one had believed in her more than me, and that it wouldn't be possible without my support. I stared at the message, reread it twice. I could almost hear her voice, practiced and upbeat, the same one she used in her YouTube videos. But I also remembered the Thanksgiving silence, the dismissal in Mom's kitchen, the way she hadn't answered my last 3 texts. I replied that evening politely. I said I was proud of her, but I wasn't in a place to fund that kind of venture. I wished her the best and meant it. Then I closed my laptop and tried not to think about it again. 1 week later, I got a call from Regions Bank's fraud department. They wanted to verify a personal loan application. $25,000 submitted online using my name, social security number, and employer info. The woman on the phone asked if I had applied last Friday. I said no. She hesitated. "We just need to confirm that before we proceed with disbursement," she said. I asked her to send me the application. She did. When I opened the PDF, my heart stopped. The name was mine. The address was my old apartment, the one I had listed on a few public documents. The employer line was accurate. But the email was unfamiliar, and the signature, while similar, was not mine. I stared at it numb. There was only one person I had spoken to that day about $25,000. One person who had all this information. I called Kayla. It rang 6 times before voicemail kicked in. I didn't leave a message. I sent a text, then another, then a final one that just said, "I need to talk to you about something serious." No response. That night I barely slept. My mind raced between disbelief and fury. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was identity theft. Maybe someone hacked her email. I told myself every possible lie because the truth was unbearable. The next morning I called the bank again. I reported the loan as fraudulent. They froze the application and launched an investigation. I filed a police report not naming anyone, just listing the facts. The officer was polite. Said these things happen more than I'd think. Told me to monitor my credit. Gave me a case number. I didn't include Kayla's name. I couldn't. That weekend I drove to Mom's house. She answered the door in her bathrobe, surprised to see me. I asked if Kayla was home. She said no. She asked if I wanted to come in. I said no. I asked if she knew anything about the loan, about Kayla's plans, about how someone might have submitted something in my name. She crossed her arms. Why would I know about any of that? I told her the loan matched exactly what Kayla had requested from me in her email. Her eyes narrowed. "Did you give it to her?" "No," I said. "Then maybe she found another way," she said, and closed the door. I stood on the porch for a full minute listening to the quiet inside. Back in my car, I stared at the steering wheel and felt something inside me slip. Not snap, not shatter, just slide away like loose gravel down a slope. The next week was a blur of paperwork and credit alerts. I put a freeze on my accounts. Had a conference call with HR to flag any suspicious activity. Canceled a trip to Nashville I had planned for work. I told people I wasn't feeling well, that I needed to take a few personal days. No one asked why. I got another email from Kayla. This one was short, just one line. I didn't mean for it to go that far. No apology, no explanation, just that. I didn't reply. I didn't block her either. I just sat with it, let it fester. In my head, I replayed every moment we shared as siblings. Her standing on a makeshift stage in our living room at 10, holding a plastic microphone, performing for me while I clapped. Her crying after her first breakup, me handing her tissues. Her calling me at midnight the day she turned 21 because she was scared she had done something stupid. Me driving to pick her up without asking questions. All of it chipped away now like paint on a wall too long exposed to the weather. I told myself maybe it wasn't her. Maybe it was Mom. Maybe Logan. Maybe someone else. But I knew. Deep down I knew. I didn't call the police again. I didn't press charges. Not because I didn't have a case, I did, but because some part of me still hoped I was wrong. I still wanted to believe that family, even fractured, could find its way back. But as I sat alone in my apartment that night, the only light coming from my laptop screen, the fraud report still open, I knew that something had cracked. Maybe not all the way through, but deep enough to matter. I was at my desk late one evening, halfway through reconciling a mess of vendor invoices, when my phone lit up with an unknown number from Asheville. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another spam call, but something made me answer. The voice on the other end was gravelly, older, but familiar in a distant way. "Nathan, this is Roy. Roy Sullivan, your uncle." It took me a second. I hadn't heard that name spoken in our house since I was a teenager. My father's older brother, the one no one talked about. The one Mom used to call a bitter liar who couldn't let go of the past. I sat back in my chair. "Uncle Roy," I said slowly. "Wow, it's been a long time." "Too long," he replied. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." I wasn't even sure this number still worked. His voice was calm but carried weight. There was no small talk, no warm-up. "I know about the loan, Nathan. And I know about what your family's been doing. That's why I'm calling. You need to hear the whole story, and you need to prepare yourself. Because what you've seen, it's just the surface." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. "How do you know about the loan?" Roy let out a low breath. "Because it's not the first time this family's used your name for their own gain. And because I've been keeping records for a long time, waiting for the day you'd need to see them." He told me he had documents, files, recordings, things he'd kept for over a decade, things he tried to bring forward once a long time ago, but no one would listen. He said he had emails, bank statements, a notarized will, and something about my grandfather. Something about how his estate was handled after he passed. I remembered that time. I was 17 when Grandpa Sullivan died. It was sudden, a stroke. He left behind a modest estate, a small house in Hickory, a few retirement accounts, and what we were told was a pile of medical debt. Mom had cried at the funeral. She and Roy got into a screaming match in the parking lot. I never knew why. Roy said it was time I did. "Your mother was executor of his estate," he said, "but there were discrepancies. And I have proof. I tried to stop it then. I filed a complaint, but she had already moved everything. I thought maybe she'd leave you out of it, but she didn't." He paused. I could hear him shift the phone, maybe sitting down. "Nathan, I know you want to believe your family still has good in them. I did too. But there are things you haven't been told, and you deserve to know. I can show you everything, if you're willing." I didn't answer right away. My head was spinning. I had spent so long trying to protect this fragile image of my family, of Mom especially. She was complicated, yes, but I believed her heart had been in the right place. She worked hard, she struggled, she survived. But this, if what Roy said was true, then it wasn't just emotional manipulation or over-reliance. It was deception, financial, legal, personal. "Where are you?" I asked. "Still in Asheville," he said. "I kept the same house. I'd like to meet. We can talk face to face. No pressure, but I think it's time." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay, I'll come." We agreed to meet that weekend. Saturday afternoon at a diner just off the Blue Ridge Parkway, halfway between his place and the main highway. He said it was quiet, had good coffee, and we wouldn't be interrupted. After we hung up, I sat in silence. The apartment felt smaller than usual. The framed photos on the bookshelf looked like strangers. I picked one up. It was of me and Kayla at a beach in Wilmington maybe 10 years ago. We were laughing, arms around each other, barefoot in the surf. I used to think that day meant something. Now I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I opened my laptop and started searching public records. My grandfather's name, estate filings, civil court dockets from the early 2000s. I didn't find much at first. A few references to a contested will, An old address in Hickory. Then one line caught my eye. Executor Margaret Sullivan. That was Mom. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept imagining Roy in his living room surrounded by folders. Documents yellowed with time, waiting for the right moment to hand them off. I kept thinking about what he said, that I had only seen the surface, what lay underneath. And why had no one warned me before on Saturday morning I left Raleigh before sunrise? The drive west was quiet fog curling along the edges of the highway, trees turning gold in the first light of fall. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than usual. My thoughts moved faster than the car. I arrived at the diner 15 minutes early. It was small, perched near a scenic overlook, the kind of place truckers stopped for pie and silence. Roy was already there, sitting in a corner booth, a manila folder beside his coffee. He looked older than I remembered, but sharper somehow. Like the years hadn't dulled him, only refined his edges. He stood when I approached, extended a hand. "Thanks for coming, Nathan." I nodded. My voice caught in my throat. "Let's talk," he said, sliding the folder toward me. "You've got a lot to catch up on." I pulled the folder closer and opened it slowly. Inside were copies of documents neatly organized in plastic sleeves. Some pages were old, yellowed slightly at the edges. Others were freshly printed. Roy reached across and pointed to the first one. "That's your grandfather's original will. Signed, notarized, filed properly. You'll see he split everything equally between your father and me, but it never played out that way." I scanned the document. My grandfather's signature was firm, dated March 2006. It detailed the distribution of his estate, the house in Hickory, 2 pension accounts, a life insurance policy, and a small business he had co-owned with a friend. My father and Roy were to share it equally. There was no mention of Mom, no mention of her children. Roy slid the second page into view. "Now this," he said, "is the revised will your mother submitted 2 weeks after he died. It names her the sole executor and beneficiary. Your father signed off on it, but that signature, I never believed it was his. I still don't." I compared the 2 signatures. At first glance they looked similar, but the second was shakier, uneven. Roy continued. "I filed a challenge back then, but your mother moved fast. She liquidated the accounts, sold the house, said everything had to go toward debt, claimed your grandfather left nothing behind." I felt my stomach twist. I remembered being told the same story, that Grandpa Walter had been in debt, that there was nothing left after medical bills. I had believed it, never questioned it. Roy pulled out a stack of bank statements. "This is from one of the accounts in your grandfather's name. It was closed 3 days before the will revision was filed. 25,000 transferred into an account registered to your mother. Another 10 into a trust, set up under Kayla's name. Then the account was drained." My hands shook as I flipped through the pages. The dates matched, the amounts matched. Roy wasn't guessing. He had evidence. Then he took out a USB drive and placed it on the table. "I recorded something a few years ago. It might be hard to listen to, but you need to hear it." We stepped outside to his car. He plugged the USB into his dash screen and hit play. The recording started mid-conversation. I recognized the voices instantly. My mother's tone was sharp, impatient. Kayla's was quieter, hesitant. "He's always asking too many questions," Mom said. "Always pushing back. If we want to keep control of the family's finances, we have to cut him out. He's not one of us, not really. He doesn't play the game." Kayla's voice wavered. "But what if he finds out?" "Then we make sure he can't do anything about it," Mom said. "He's too proud to press charges, too stubborn to believe we'd ever do that to him. That's what makes it easy." The recording ended. I stood there in silence, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the wind outside. I leaned on the car, trying to breathe. All these years, every dinner, every favor, every time I stepped in to help. It wasn't just taken for granted, it was planned. I wasn't the backbone of the family, I was a contingency. They didn't love me in spite of my boundaries, they resented me because of them. I turned to Roy, still stunned. "Why are you showing me this now?" He looked tired but resolute. "Because you needed to see it for yourself, and because I knew it would come to this. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped your mother had changed. But people like her, they don't change. They just get smarter." I sat back down in the booth folder in my lap. My childhood flashed in fragments. Dad fixing the car in the driveway. Mom counting grocery coupons. Me babysitting my siblings, thinking we were a team, thinking we were a family. I looked up at Roy. "Why didn't anyone believe you?" "Because I wasn't useful," he said. "Your mother convinced everyone I was bitter, that I was jealous, that I never moved on after the estate, and maybe I was angry, but not wrong." He paused, then added, "You're the only one who ever saw things clearly, Nathan. You just didn't want to admit it." I stared down at the folder again. Pages that rewrote everything I thought I knew. They had never intended for me to stay in the picture. The support, the warmth, the gratitude, it was a front, a strategy. And once I stopped giving without question, I became a threat. I closed the folder and looked out at the trees lining the road beyond the diner. A part of me wanted to throw it all away, pretend I never saw it. That the voices on the recording weren't real, that love hadn't been used as a weapon. But I couldn't unhear what I heard, I couldn't unsee what was printed in black and white. And I knew then something fundamental had changed. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. I drove back to my mother's house on a cloudy Thursday afternoon, engine humming low, as if it too was bracing for what was ahead. I hadn't told her I was coming. Part of me still clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, this was all a misunderstanding I could make right with a conversation. The house looked the same. Vinyl siding in need of a power wash, the wind chime she got from a church fair clinking faintly in the breeze. I parked across the street, watched the windows for a long moment, then stepped out and walked up the driveway. When I knocked, I heard movement inside. The blinds in the front room shifted slightly. A moment later, the door creaked open. My mother stood there in a cardigan and slippers, eyes wide with the kind of fear I had never seen from her before. "Nathan, what are you doing here? I came to talk," I said, voice steady. "That's all. I just want to talk." She stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. She looked around quickly, eyes darting across the front yards like she was checking for witnesses. Then she raised her voice. "You can't keep doing this," she said, tone pitched higher than usual. "You've already taken enough. Just leave us alone." I blinked. I hadn't said anything yet. "Mom, I'm not here to fight. I just..." She gasped, suddenly clutched her chest and dropped to her knees. "Help!" she shrieked. "He's threatening me. Somebody help me!" I stood frozen. Her voice echoed down the block. The screen door next door opened and Benji Morris stepped out. Phone in hand, brow furrowed. He lived 2 houses down, worked as a mechanic, used to bring over ribs for July 4th barbecues. We hadn't spoken in months. Mom was now sitting on the porch, breathing heavily, one hand gripping the banister for effect. "Nathan, stop yelling," she cried, though I hadn't raised my voice once. Benji looked at me, then her, then raised his phone higher. He was filming. I didn't say a word. I backed away slowly, hands at my sides, pulse racing. I turned, walked down the driveway, got in my car, and drove off. My ears were ringing. My chest felt tight. At home, I sat on the couch in silence, trying to understand what had just happened. It wasn't shock. Not anymore. It was something heavier, a kind of grief, not for the mother I had, but for the one I thought I had for 35 years. 2 days later, I got a text from Benji. It was a Dropbox link, no message at first. Then another text followed. I can't pretend I didn't see that. You need to know. I opened the video. It was a wide shot from the sidewalk, clear audio. Me standing quietly on the porch, Mom escalating, collapsing, screaming. Not once did I move toward her. Not once did I threaten her. But the performance was convincing enough to shake a neighbor. And that had been the point. I stared at the screen, numb. There was no way she hadn't staged this. The timing, the delivery, the audience. It was theater. And I was the villain in her play. Benji texted again. I didn't believe it at first. I've known your mom a long time. But this was something else. I thought you deserved to have a copy. Thank you, I replied. No problem, he wrote. I'm sorry, man. I leaned back on the couch and closed my eyes. My mind played through every lie, every redirection, every carefully constructed moment she had orchestrated to keep control. It wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about leverage, keeping people in their place, keeping me in mine. The next morning, I started organizing every document Roy had given me. I opened a new file on my laptop and began compiling a timeline. Not out of anger, but necessity. I needed to see it all laid out. Every manipulation, every lie, every stolen piece of trust. This wasn't just dysfunction anymore, it was design. The next step was legal. I reached out to Vanessa Miller, an attorney I'd met through work 3 years ago when we were navigating a tax audit. Sharp, ethical, relentless. I trusted her. I didn't give her every detail up front, just enough to get started. I told her there were questions around the handling of my grandfather's estate, and that I needed her to look into a trust called the Cole Heritage Trust. She asked for the documents Roy had given me. I scanned everything and sent it over that night. Vanessa called me the next morning. I've reviewed the documents. And you're right to be suspicious. There are several red flags. But before I say more, I need to run a few things down. 2 days later, she requested a meeting. We sat across from each other at her small office in Durham. She had a yellow legal pad filled with notes and a tablet open to scanned records. Let's start with the basics, she said. The Cole Heritage Trust was established in 2004 by your grandfather, Walter Cole, according to the original trust agreement filed with the county clerk's office. The trust named you, Nathan Cole, as the sole beneficiary. The intent was to preserve the assets for your education, housing, and future family. No mention of your mother, your siblings, or any secondary trustees. I nodded, heart pounding. Vanessa continued. However, in 2006, 2 weeks after Walter passed away, a transfer of assets was filed. It moved full control of the trust into an account under Margaret Cole's name. The justification, a notarized letter claiming Walter had changed his wishes. But here's the thing. The notary who allegedly witnessed that signature doesn't exist. There's no license on file. And the signature itself is missing a consistent baseline suggesting forgery. She pulled out a printout and slid it across the table. It was a side-by-side comparison of Walter's known signatures versus the one on the amendment. The difference was obvious once you knew where to look. The slant was off, the pressure inconsistent. There's more, she said. I did some digging into the transaction trail from the trust. In 2007, roughly $480,000 was moved into a joint account, under your mother's and Logan's names. That account was later used to buy property in their names, fund 2 business investments, and open a line of credit. None of it reported to the IRS under trust guidelines. I sat back in the chair, stunned. You're telling me they stole the money? She paused. I'm telling you the transfer was not legal, and that the original documents support your claim to the full trust. What about the statute of limitations? Trust fraud has a discovery clause, she said. It begins when the fraud is discovered, not committed. Given you only found out last week and have documentation proving you weren't aware, you're within your rights to pursue legal remedy. I felt like the room shifted. For the first time in weeks, clarity broke through the fog of betrayal. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't paranoid, I was right. Vanessa leaned forward. You have a strong case, Nathan, strong enough to file for full restitution and damages. But you need to decide how far you want to take this. We can move forward quietly, issue a demand letter, or take it to court. I looked at the documents again. The numbers, the forged name, the bank account trails, Logan's name on wire transfers. My mother's initials next to every authorization. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't someone getting in over their head. This was organized, deliberate, cold. They knew what they were doing. How long will this take? I asked. If they cooperate, 6 months, if not a year, maybe more. And if they fight, then we fight back, she said. I stood up, shook her hand. Her grip was firm. Thank you, Vanessa. You're welcome, Nathan, and for what it's worth. You're doing the right thing. Driving home, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel satisfied either, just focused, resigned to the path in front of me. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming what was mine. The years I spent doubting myself, the money meant for my future, the identity they tried to write out of the story. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. We started with a certified letter. Vanessa drafted it with surgical precision. A formal notice of revocation of financial support addressed to Margaret Cole, Logan Cole, and Kayla Cole. It listed each payment I'd made in the past 10 years. The accounts they had used, the dates I was billed for debts that weren't mine. It wasn't aggressive, it was factual. Unemotionally brutal. The second letter was a demand for full restitution of the Cole Heritage Trust. It cited the fraud, the forged signature, the illegal transfer of funds, and the tax violations tied to misuse of a charitable entity. Vanessa filed it with the county court, attaching evidence and requesting a freeze on the trust-related assets until the case was heard. I didn't call them. I didn't show up. I didn't post anything online. I simply disappeared from their balance sheets. A week later, Kayla got hit with a collection suit. The bank finally traced the unpaid loan back to her address, and when she couldn't verify my signature, they opened a fraud investigation. Her influencer project halted. Her sponsors pulled out quietly. One of her YouTube collaborations deleted their shared videos, citing a breach of ethics. Another week passed. Logan's application for a startup accelerator was rejected, not because of me, but because the due diligence team flagged irregularities in his credit history. The account he opened with Mom was under scrutiny, linked to unauthorized withdrawals from the original trust account. His name had become a liability, and the investor who once called him promising didn't return his calls anymore. Mom, for her part, stayed silent. No calls, no texts, no legal response. Vanessa said she was likely buying time, trying to find a way out without implicating herself further. But the damage was done. The mask was off, and I didn't need her to speak to know what she was thinking. She was waiting for me to cool off, waiting for me to forgive the way I always had. Not this time. I changed my number, closed the joint emergency account I'd kept open for Logan, canceled the credit card Kayla used for her travel expenses. Not once did I yell. Not once did I threaten. I just pressed delete line by line. I checked the court filing progress every evening, watching as the paperwork moved from review to docket. I signed affidavits, attached statements, made copies. It was tedious, boring, methodical, but it was justice. I started sleeping through the night again. I started running in the mornings, clearing my head along the greenway trails near my apartment in Chapel Hill. It felt like rebuilding, like breathing without weight on my chest. Benji texted me once to check in. Heard things are moving. "You good?" I replied. "I'm better than I've been in years." One morning, a notice arrived from the county. A preliminary hearing date was set. Vanessa called, voice upbeat. "We're in. They're taking it seriously. You've got a solid shot, Nathan. Better than most, and if they don't respond by the deadline, default judgment." That evening, I sat alone on my balcony, coffee in hand, watching the lights of the city blink into focus. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel pulled in 1,000 directions. I didn't feel responsible for holding broken things together. They had built a house of cards, and the wind was finally catching up. The house on Mendenhall Drive was listed for sale 2 weeks after the court accepted our motion. The real estate listing showed it as a motivated seller property priced below market. I didn't need to call anyone to know why. They were bleeding financially, scrambling to cover debts now that the pipelines I once funded were dry. I didn't check in on the showings. I didn't drive by. But news found its way to me anyway. A neighbor mentioned seeing a moving truck. Benji sent a photo of a for sale sign leaning sideways on the front lawn. My childhood home, where I'd patched the leaky sink, repainted the porch, replaced the furnace when it failed one winter, was being gutted and emptied. They never called, but the emails came. Kayla sent one first. It was short. I was wrong. I should have said something earlier. I didn't know how far things had gone. Then Logan followed. I let Mom handle things. I didn't know about the paperwork. I was just trying to keep us all afloat, and finally a voicemail from my mother. No words, just silence. Then a soft inhale before she hung up. I didn't answer any of them. I wrote one letter instead, printed on white paper, no return address. "I used to be family, but I'm not a tool for you to sustain your greed. I'm reclaiming what's mine, not for revenge, for peace." I folded it, sealed it, and mailed 3 identical copies. Days later, Uncle Roy called. His voice was steadier than I'd ever heard it. "Congratulations," he said. "It's done. You've got full legal control. The assets, the trust, the shares, everything's yours again, and the court sealed the ruling so they can't touch it without a new case." Which they'd lose. I exhaled, not in relief, but in quiet acknowledgement. This wasn't a victory parade. There was no celebration, just the subtle satisfaction of balance being restored. "What happens now?" I asked. "You live your life," Roy said. "You finally get to." I stared out the window of my apartment. The sun was cutting through clouds, casting soft light across the buildings. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about who needed a check, who needed a bailout, who might show up at my door with another emergency. The noise had stopped. Justice didn't come with sirens or applause. It came with silence, with finality. I didn't need them to say sorry. I didn't need them to admit what they'd done. I had the truth, I had the proof, and I had my life back. That was enough. I drove down Highway 70 with no music playing. The windows were half open, the late fall breeze brushing past my shoulder, bringing with it the scent of pine and something faintly sweet I couldn't place. It was a 3-hour drive to New Bern, but I didn't mind. I needed the quiet. I needed the distance. I hadn't been back in years. The last time was for Walter's funeral. I remembered standing in the front row in a stiff black suit holding my mother's purse while she cried into a tissue. I hadn't cried then. I didn't know what I'd lost. The cemetery was quiet, small setback from the road framed by a row of old oak trees that creaked in the wind. I found his headstone easily. Clean, simple. Walter Cole, 1932-2006. A man of vision and strength. I knelt down and reached into my coat pocket. The original trust documents were folded carefully inside a protective sleeve. I pulled them out and laid them gently on the grass at the base of the stone. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," I said quietly. "But I came back, and I understand now." A squirrel darted across the path behind me. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out once and then went quiet again. I sat back, resting my hands on my knees, staring at his name. Memories came slowly unspooling one by one, him teaching me how to hammer a nail straight. Him sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper and folding it in thirds. Him taking me fishing once, even though he hated boats. He always wanted me to have more. Not things, not money, but clarity, purpose. I remembered what he told me once when I was 12 and worried that I wasn't enough. Real family, he'd said, doesn't ask you to shrink for them. Real family makes room for who you are becoming. I closed my eyes and took a breath. That truth had taken years to reach me. It had cost me, but it was mine now. I didn't hate my mother. I didn't hate Logan or Kayla, but I wasn't coming back to them. Not as the safety net, not as the fixer, not as the silent enabler of their choices. I had made peace with walking away. I stood, brushed the grass from my coat, and looked down once more. "Thank you," I said. I left the papers where they lay, a gesture, a final chapter, not for legal purposes, but for myself, proof that I'd returned, that I'd faced it all and stood taller on the other side. As I walked back to the car, the wind picked up again. Leaves swirled across the path in slow spirals. I pulled the keys from my pocket, unlocked the door, and paused for a moment before getting in. It didn't feel like an end. It felt like a beginning I had earned. The apartment felt quieter these days. Not empty, but calm. I kept the windows open more often. I cooked for myself. I read books I hadn't touched in years. I even started writing again, not for anyone else, just for me. I didn't press charges. I didn't go after them beyond what the court had already ruled. The restitution had been settled. The trust was mine again. But more importantly, my peace was mine. That was the real inheritance. Instead of expanding my portfolio or buying a new car, I took a portion of the recovered assets and met with the board at UNC. I asked about creating a scholarship fund, something long-term, something meaningful. We built it together over several months. The Cole Opportunity Fund, a full-ride scholarship for students who had supported their families while in school like I had once done. We launched it quietly, no press release, just the first application cycle and a simple web page. I didn't need applause, I needed impact. I also started recording, audio journals mostly. At first, it was just therapy, talking through things late at night. Then it became a habit. I started telling the whole story from the beginning, not the courtroom version, the human version, the kid who thought love meant giving everything, the man who finally learned to stop. I remember the night I recorded the final entry. I was sitting on my balcony again, the city lights scattered like constellations. I pressed record and spoke slowly. They told me not to contact them again. What they didn't realize was that was the moment I found my way back to myself. I paused, then added, and maybe that was the point all along. I haven't heard from them in months. Uncle Roy and I still speak occasionally. We keep things light. He sends book recommendations. I send him updates on the scholarship fund. The rest of the family, they're living their choices. I'm living mine. Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It came in moments, in choosing not to reread the emails, in refusing to replay the betrayals in my mind, in letting the silence stay silent. I didn't forgive them because they asked. I forgave them because I deserved to let go. There's freedom in that. Quiet, steady, unremarkable freedom. And if you're listening to this, if any part of my story sounds like your own, I want you to know something. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to choose peace. You're allowed to stop bleeding for people who never learned to stop cutting. They may call it abandonment, but sometimes cutting ties is the only way to heal. If you've ever been an Ethan, choose yourself. Choose to protect what's left, because that's where healing begins. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. You're not alone and your peace matters.